Okay, welcome everyone to the Sky Community Call, 23rd October 2025. Um, Thank you for joining us. I'll start with the regular disclaimer. Nothing discussed today should be construed as investment or any other type of advice. We'll go through the usual agenda or plan with a quick introduction of the ecosystem and market highlights for the week before deep diving into a Q&A with Rune. So going straight in, and the first call out is with STUSDS going live, the first risk capital token from Sky Ecosystem. Those who are on the forum would have seen a lot of activity for what has actually been a manual process for rate discovery to get to the target 90% utilization for this proposition. We've seen quite a range of rates being offered, and the current rate is at 5.5% for the supply side, 6% for the borrow. I think the learnings have been very clear, strong supply demand throughout the rate range, but the borrow uptake has been slow. So a lot of learnings to be taken in from this process as it gets automated. The next call out has been the updates from our first active stars in terms of their spell activity. So from Grove, the onboarding of Aave markets to provide USDC and RLUSD or Ripple USD liquidity to lend against RWA collateral in the Aave Horizon market at this first stage. And from Spark, an increase of their USDT inventory, no doubt as a result of the success they're seeing on Spark Lend with the USDT market, and actually also on their PYUSD market or the PayPal USD. An allocation or their initial allocation into the delta neutral superstate USCC strategy, and also the launch of Spark Savings V2, which tap yield directly from the Spark liquidity layer, and which will have savings offerings for USDC, USDT, and also Ethereum. And I think as you look at the activity from the stars, what becomes very apparent is that as Sky ecosystem scales, it is by no means restricted to just USDS offerings. And I really sort of look at it as USDS being the fuel that powers the underlying core infra layer for what is an open on-chain economy that is very much stablecoin agnostic. So as the stablecoin economy scales, a lot of value to be captured there. The third call out, a forum post from the ecosystem team for capital transparency. I know there's been a lot of demand for transparency around costs, and that's exactly what they've provided, and confirmed the conclusion of the launch project and the transition to the Sky simplification project. So as part of that, a few new budget categories introduced, such as the simplification buffer budget and also ecosystem entity grants. There is a complete breakdown by Sky, by USDS, and sort of the consolidated USD of all expenses by category for those who are interested in further studying that. And as we've been doing recently, the main highlights from the weekly core council meetings. It's very clear it's going to be a very busy end of year period, and Rune has actually posted separate posts just yesterday for these items. But top of mind right now for the core council is the Sky rewards for Sky staking as a replacement for the current USD reward scheme, and that will lead to an increase in the Sky buyback to 300k a day. There's also a separate post on the treasury management function and how that will be used during this incubation or Genesis incubation phase for the Genesis agents, and the implications that has both for the core council funding, but also all the steps that are going to be included in that treasury management function as we go through this incubation phase. And finally, there's a post for Genesis Capital funding and getting all the Genesis agents up and running that will have an accounting impact on the surplus buffer. And I'm sure Rune will go into more details as we get into the Q&A. But just before we get there, as is customary, a quick look at the dashboards. So as mentioned, we do have a very new look, refreshed, simple, easy to navigate dashboard from the team at BA Analytica, and it really is. There's so much here if you want to dive into the detail, but also, on the landing page, it's all the main fundamental metrics that you'd want to see from the ecosystem. And the big call out is clearly on the supply side. We've hit an all-time high since the launch of USDS. And you see that very clearly over this last year. And that's been driven by growth in both USDS and DAI, clearly the bulk of the growth coming from USDS. And I did want to take a few minutes to just dive into some of the market and ecosystem trends that are driving that. So overall, across the market, it's been a very interesting 2-week period. On October 10th, we all learnt about ADL, or auto deleveraging, as an industry. And in general, since then, the industry has been deleveraging, and you see that as yields come down from all the major stablecoin yield offerings. This has left the SSR towards the top of the pack, and in terms of yield, and you see that actually playing out in the market in terms of where stablecoins are flowing. So through this period, we have seen outflows from Athena and also Aave. And you see that flowing into the likes of Maple, Morpho, especially for USDC, but the main beneficiary has actually been Sky with SUSDS. And as a result, for USDS, an increase in supply of about 1 billion in the period, driven very much by SUSDS, but also STUSDS, and that's been sort of partially offset by the USDS token rewards, which has seen outflows. For SUSDS, the inflows are driven very much by Maple and also the Spark SUSDC offering, and you can see clearly how that's scaled during the period. And what's interesting for Spark USDC offering, which we've actually added to our dashboard, you'll see the holders are the very large institutional type holders who are driving that. So those who know the crypto markets very well, really taking a strong position. The crypto funds also actually very active in STUSDS. And as we mentioned, DAI also grown through the period, not as much. I did want to just quickly, briefly talk about Athena. We sort of looked at some of the outflows for SUSDE, but you can see very clearly when you look at the wider USDE supply, how that's fallen. I mean, almost 3.5 billion up until yesterday, and really highlighting just how in our market, when capital moves, how quickly and abruptly it does so. And that momentum has certainly carried on through today, and we'll see where that stops. And just as a last call out on this dashboard, which is open source and open to anyone in the community, we've actually added a lot more analytics, but one we have added because we think it's structurally important to the stablecoin market are the stablecoins on Morpho, and especially you'll see how USDC is growing there. So with that, I'll end the intro section, and we'll head into the Q&A with Rune, who hopefully we can invite to the stage as a speaker.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, we have a lot to cover today. Unfortunately, I'm gonna have to just go away for just like a short moment in a little bit. I just gotta move some stuff around and get properly set up for the full hour. Um, but first, I will just start off with walking through the three big proposals that I posted yesterday, and then we can just dive into the Q&A on this stuff. This is like some of the really major stuff coming out of well, I guess what you call it, like the sort of coming out of like the whole launch process in a sense, right? And the cool thing is that with these proposals here that have now been unveiled, that are all of them are sort of in it. Well, maybe not the sky to sky sticking, right? But the other pieces, they're a bit sort of surprising proposals, right? There's probably a lot of people that are like that didn't expect this stuff, or like didn't fully see these full details coming, which is like I think for a lot of people who've been following Sky over the past 4 years, it's just been another sort of twist after another, right? With some new proposal that introduces something completely new. And the good news is this batch of these proposals and concepts that's being discussed here, that is basically almost at the end. So the really only remaining unknown thing that's coming up after this is the details related to the generator agents, which are also mentioned in the post, right? But when we actually start getting into multiple stable coins and how that's going to be set up, there's still like some stuff that has to be figured out that is just not at the point where it can be sort of directly proposed yet. But that's about it, right? So then actually we are getting very close to the point where the whole project and ecosystem and protocol and community and governance and all of the pieces, they can begin to really set up on a very solid and predictable foundation for the next 10 years, where we will then build all of it out, right? But in a way where we're no longer building the pillars and the foundations for everything. We're building like all the cool stuff, all the meat and potatoes that goes on top. Um, Let me post one by one. And I also think in general, so in the Frontier Foundation, we have this saying we call garbage valley. So it's like Sky has for quite a while been in what we call the garbage valley, which is like where things are just so confusing and it's very hard to like communicate all the value we have, and it's like severely misunderstood and undervalued project, right? Because we know there's such insane amount of super advanced, super amazing technology and value and crazy powerful and driven builders and teams and all of that. But it's just so much of it, and it is not properly framed and structured and communicated and clarified yet, right? So it's just like a very frustrating experience to sort of be messing around with all of these things. And there's something new, and then there's something new, and even now, right? We still not at the end of the year. We still have these Genesis phase proposals to really explain and sort of fit into the bigger picture. But I do start to feel like we are getting very, very close, right? We're at the point where not only are the changes going to stop, but also we are gonna get to a point where we can start, people start to realize the value. Also, just because all of crypto is kind of, once again, the thing happens when you go, something that flies really high up and gets really hot and really, really wild. At some point, things turn around. And I think that's happening to a smaller extent right now. And it's in that type of situation that the approach Sky takes to everything, which is to build foundations and let prioritize security, slow is fast, these types of concepts. Here we go. Finally, I could figure out how to do it. To pay off, right? Slowly and step by step, but we're starting to see these inflows and seeing users that realize that it's worth it to also think about the risk management side of things and sustainability, and not just what happens tomorrow when we get the high APY, but how sustainable and how safe is it going to be long term. Okay, so the first proposal is sky to sky staking rewards. Hope you all appreciate this this like nomenclature convention of like how to write out how a farm works, right? So the big I don't even know what this sign is called. Anyway, but this one, that's the farm, right? You sky because that's the thing you have a lot of, and then you get a small amount of this sky, right? So it's like this means like sky is greater than sky means it's a farm where you put in sky and you get out sky, right? If it says USDS is greater than sky, then it's you put in USDS and you get out sky. And the other way around, right? What we used to have was sky is greater than USDS, meaning you put in sky, you get out USDS. So yeah, I think since we have so many farms and different ways of getting different tokens, I want to try standardizing on this type of simple sort of this type of phrasing it longer term, because we're going to have so many Genesis agents and they're all going to have their own tokens, and there's both going to be sky to keel tokens and USDS to keel and sky to grove, USDS to grove, and so on. So there's going to be a lot of farms and a lot of things written this way. Anyway, so in this case, this is a proposal about sky to sky staking rewards. The reason behind it is really that it's a very good opportunity for the protocol to do a lot of buybacks right now. And that can be done without reducing staking rewards if the staking rewards just become denominated in sky. So basically, with this proposal, the staking rewards will be increased to 300,000 USDS per day from the current 100,000, so a 3x increase. But the USDS rewards that is currently the bulk of the Sky staking rewards would be reduced to 0. And then because of like a technical limitation of how this can be implemented, because this is not meant to be a permanent feature, this is just like a short-term way to massively increase the buyback. We're using a simple solution which puts some limitations on how you can basically modify the rate, which requires that in order to have like a good rate, a lot of Sky is needed up front, which is why the Sky Frontier Foundation is preparing to do this 500 million Sky token transfer to the protocol treasury. And then through these governance actions, the governance process can then decide to use these received Sky tokens for the staking reward mechanism. And like I said, it's this is not a permanent feature. And as it also says here, basically at some point it makes sense to revisit reverting back to USDS, because fundamentally, if the Sky token is properly priced, then it is more efficient to distribute USDS. That's funny. Okay, so there's like a quick question. So basically, I'll answer like very quick questions related to each proposal. Then longer questions, more deeper questions, I will wait with those, and then we will do sort of more combined Q&A at the end, where we go into more detail with stuff. So I'm just gonna stop that, and then I'm gonna, yeah, don't show me that again. Thanks, Discord. Okay, so the question is, how long is Sky to Sky proposed to last? Well, so this first interval will be 90 days at the proposed rate, which would be 500 million over 90 days. But it's actually going to be set up in a bit of a different way, so it can be around 90 days at the rate of whatever 500 million divided by 90 is. And this could also, I believe the rate could be changed before the 90 days, so it might also be that we can reduce the rate earlier, which may be desirable if the Sky price goes up a lot. But also it can be extended. So there's no specific duration proposed for this program right now. Rather, the proposal is that when the market conditions for Sky significantly changes, it might make sense to revert back to USDS. All right, now let's dive into the next proposal. There's also some questions inside the forum posts themselves, and I'll also go into those. I'll get into those unless we get completely flooded with questions here. Right, so this is the Genesis phase core council budget proposal. So this is basically a proposal to create this sort of temporary concept of a Genesis, of like a special value for the core council budget percentage that lasts for during the Genesis phase, which is like this early phase when a lot of stuff is being done manually and a huge amount of work and really cool new features and stars and agents and technology and all of that is being built all at once. And so the idea is basically that there's this like very simplified way that the Sky protocol treasury management function works during the Genesis phase, where 21% of the protocol's total profits are taken every month to put into the core council budgets account. And then 1% is used for delegates, which is just like was proposed in the original treasury management function. Then this 300,000 USDS buyback would be applied following the subtraction of the 21% profits. And then finally, all remaining profits after the 300K buyback is then used to fund the surplus buffer. And then if the surplus buffer gets really large, which would be some number determined by governance, then there could be some simple algorithm, a simple kind of like some simple function that determines if some additional leftover profits above and beyond the 300K is then used to further boost the buyback or providing more staking rewards in some shape or form. And so this is actually like a major shift from the earlier treasury management function, right, which was set up to have this like fixed 5% of Sky profits per month, which is the desired target, right? So basically, ultimately, I believe it's completely realistic to keep like the total, what we call the governance overhead, at 10%, and out of those 10%, 5% can go to direct core council budget in the long run. Like the overall total cost for the core council would be 8% in the long-term treasury management function. But so this is basically an increase in that budget of like 2.5x, right? With 2.5 times as much. And the reason for this is basically that, I mean, so originally I really did not expect that we would see the need to do this towards the end of the year when we first set out to try to implement the transition to zero fixed and arbitrarily set expenses through governance in the core of Sky, which was the goal that was set at the beginning of this year. But what's clear to me now and what really has changed is just that there's such an extreme amount of stuff being done all at once right now. And it's all coming together, right? We're slowly about to emerge out of Garbage Valley and have things be a little bit more tangible and easy to explain to people. But there's also still like a huge lot of the value that's hidden, right? So there's a huge amount of stars in the works, but only 3 of them have been announced so far, and Keel hasn't even launched yet, probably, right? It's just been announced. But there's a lot more stuff coming, and there's like more than 100 people, super talented people, all working frantically to stand all of this up for the first time ever, and most importantly, making sure nothing breaks as it's all happening, right? And so it became clear to me that like you really don't want during this kind of highly like very critical, stressful phase to have any doubt about whether the budgets are going to hold and whether like whether there's job security and those types of concerns, right? So and this shouldn't actually be an issue. So there is like Sky is immensely profitable, and the Frontier Foundation has been endowed with a huge amount of money. But so everything sort of makes sense right now. All the math kind of checks out, but who knows what will happen with Donald Trump or the economy or the markets or whatever, right? So if something went wrong, then maybe it wouldn't be so um, stable anymore. And so in that context, it basically makes sense to basically put this in place now so that it's already there, so that something like this wouldn't have to be introduced later in some kind of reactive fashion. It's much better and much safer to just introduce this type of kind of like additional temporary higher budget upfront, and then use it to build up a really good buffer that makes everybody feel safe and know that they're going to get paid and that they can continue working for a year and they'll still get paid. And then basically winding it down when it's completely clear that there simply will not be any kind of financial issues, even in various risk situations. Um, and yeah, so basically from there, um, the goal is then to build out all of this most critical stuff, deliver all of the value, and then basically that's gonna guarantee the value of uh, of the ecosystem to the point where it'll be possible to then transition towards the long-term treasury management function. But another thing that's also is clear is like the actual like we can't just like transition to the long-term treasury management function in one go because it actually involves like a lot of advanced complex components to it. So it's no matter what going to be this like gradual process of basically standing up each component. So the question around the number of stars and so on, I'll get into that later after going through the forum posts. Let me see if there's anything else, something with STCS. Liquidity, yeah, no, I will just go straight to the next question, straight to the next post, the really big one. Actually, okay, so just unfortunately, I'm gonna have to just wait for 1.5 minutes or so, and then I'll be back. So I don't know, whip up the background music if you can, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so the big finale. This the here we go. So the concept of the Genesis capital is quite complicated. Um, well, in some ways it's complicated, in some ways it's pretty simple, right? So basically, because of this desire to do like a phase transition, right? Where we get to the Genesis phase, we get past like the sort of the launch of the Genesis phase, where the new Genesis stars are being Genesis stars and Genesis executors, right? Genesis agents are being stood up and capitalized and funded. The easiest solution is to do all of them rapidly and sort of upfront so that the agents, some of the like the core components of the agents are already created and the capital is already transferred into them. And then basically saying that's it, right? That's the extent of how many there'll be done. So that there can be this certainty in the ecosystem around, okay, this is what the landscape is going to look like, right? This is how many tokens we're going to get in these different Genesis agents. And the amounts, the amount of capital that gets deployed into each, and simply also so that it's like fair to basically tell all the other teams that also want to do Sky agents that they will have to wait, right, until later in the Genesis phase, right, because this big initial deployment of the Genesis agents has already happened. But the problem is that these Genesis agents are incredibly valuable, right? They're way more valuable than I think any of us thought. And so originally the plan was that the vast majority of the capital to the Genesis agents should be provided by external capital. But the problem is that these are going to be like basically the most valuable stars. And if we fund them through Genesis capital from Sky, then we get the tokens and get to distribute that through farming. So we're going to get a huge return on that capital. So it's just way better to have Sky provide as much of the capital as possible and only in with I guess about half of them will there be like a significant amount of external capital. Um, and of course, still many of them will be like almost fully funded by external capital, but still with like a decent chunk coming from Sky, so that we can ensure that USDS holders and Sky holders they get to get tokens in all of these, right? And of course, when USDS holders get tokens in Genesis agents, Sky holders also benefit because they earn additional profits because then it becomes the USDS that's farming Genesis agent tokens counts as unrewarded USDS, right? So Sky gets the full savings rate on that USDS. But then, as is described in this post, this can cause the surplus buffer to go negative if all of this capital is transferred upfront in advance without the surplus buffer having enough funds to cover all that capital. And the kind of the most important fix to this issue was already introduced in the past, right? So that's this concept of the Genesis capital backstop. What that basically means is that even when the capital is moved out of the surplus buffer and sits in the sub proxy of a Genesis agent, it still is available to act as a backstop in a USDS insolvency scenario. So that, of course, it's not possible for USDS to become technically insolvent because that was, of course, that would be a complete disaster to do that, right? That would not at all be worth it, the governance advantage of funding these upfront. So with that in place, actually, the capital is just basically moving around. It's not actually disappearing out of the protocol, right? Because even though it sits in the Genesis agents, it's still fundamentally controlled by Sky from a technical and governance and sort of like high level governance perspective, in the sense of like the fundamental rules that applies to it. And the critical rule here being the Genesis capital backstop will apply to it, right? As long as it's needed. So even if the surplus buffer goes negative, the total buffer of like the total backstop of capital doesn't change actually. So it's really just like a sort of, it's a communication, it's sort of a confusion problem, right? Where it's like it's confusing that the surplus buffer is going negative. On the other hand, of course, the front ends dashboards, they don't show the surplus buffer directly because it's a technical concept, right? They show the actual backstop that's available, right? Because that's also it's not just from the surplus buffer, it's also from the Genesis agents. However, there's another issue that can then occur over time once you have all of this Genesis capital sitting in the Genesis stars, and that's this basically the risk of long-term risk encumbrance. So what that means is like once it's sitting as Genesis capital in a Genesis star, that star is able to use it to actually take risk with, right, under the Sky risk, like under the Sky risk framework. And of course, it'll happen sort of slowly because it's not like all of these Genesis agents are launching all in one go. They're launching like bit by bit. But it will start building, like the capital will become continuously encumbered over time. With this is to then launch this other really cool feature and product that's coming out of Sky, which is SR-USDS, Senior Risk USDS. So that's kind of similar to ST-USDS, Staked USDS, in that it's a risk token, but it's dealing with a completely different type of risk, right? So this SR-USDS token, what it basically does is it acts as a pile of capital that sits in front of the surplus buffer. So if there's like a shortfall in the surplus buffer, then there's a shortfall in the surplus buffer, and there's also a lot of encumbrance on the Genesis capital, then SR-USDS can be basically obtained by Sky Core by basically paying like by paying a good return on SR-USDS, similar to how we similar to the higher return you get on ST-USDS, and that can then be used to basically get funds into the protocol that would act as that additional risk buffer, which would then allow the stars to just go like take their risk to the max without any without any problems for the protocol, right? So that's actually a really cool solution, and it even allows us to bootstrap this product because SRUSDS eventually will then transform into this long-term product that the stars tap into in order to also access even more risk capital. Yeah, and then I think like the big topic to go to from here, which was also something I was asked in a couple of places, is how many Genesis agents are coming and what's the total amount of Genesis capital. And so the total amount, it's not completely clear yet, and I think it will not really be fully finalized, this number, until something like February or March. But I think it'll be something like in total it'll be something like 150 million. So basically, at the current rate around February, based on my best estimate, the surplus buffer would be at around minus 100 million. And then the question of how quickly it then fills up again is actually like a huge part of that is a function of how soon the various Genesis stars launch their tokens, because that's the big driver of profits for Sky, right? Is when the Genesis stars start launching the tokens, that's going to result in like a huge amount of additional profits. If nobody, like if there's no like if not a single Genesis star launches a token at all for some reason, so even like Grove and Keel and the really early ones, they're heavily delayed over the course of next year, then it would take like probably a year or more to fill up the surplus buffer. And like simply just getting it back to zero, which is then at the which is the point at which SRUSDS wouldn't be needed anymore. With Genesis agent token launches, I think it will happen much sooner. So we'll see when exactly that happens. But of course, even with a negative surplus buffer and with SRUSDS and so on, the other thing that'll happen when the Genesis agent tokens launch over the course of 2026 is that this is going to just further increase the amount of staking rewards available for Sky holders, right? So the big driver of Sky staking rewards is not going to be increase in protocol profits, because all those increased profits, they'll just go to refill the surplus buffer. The big driver will come from the 30% of the Sky token allocation coming from the Genesis supply of the Genesis agents that is earmarked for Sky staking, right? So that's going to be quite a lot of tokens. Yeah, I mean, of course, you can't like it's a kind of a foolish comparison to make, right? But if you look at something like Spark, Sky put in 25 million, and right now the tokens that Sky holds is like, I mean, it's something like 200 million. So that's an 8x return, right? So of course, again, this is not it's not realistic to make this comparison, but that's just if we just imagine, like we haven't taken an imaginary world where we get an 8x return on all of the Genesis capital, then it would be about a billion in total return from all of the, which would be actual income accruing to the protocol, right? Because either it's paid out directly as Sky staking rewards, or Sky earns that money through taking the savings rate on the USDS that's farming the token. Okay, I think that's the big picture of this stuff. So I mean, there's a lot of questions and not that much time, so I'm actually gonna read through and see if there's something that's particularly okay. Well, I'll just go through Chris's giant list here first, because okay. So first is this question of if the foundation will stake Sky and receive Sky. Yes, so the foundation will stake Sky and receive Sky, but will not sell the Sky it receives. So it will fund itself through borrowing during this phase. And then eventually, at some point, right, we expect the Sky will switch to USDS. But otherwise, what the foundation would also be able to do is receive other tokens than Sky, and then use those to fund its operations. Will staking rewards in Sky allow us to open up more nations? I can't answer that right now. Smarter buyback system. I mean, it's coming. It's just there's a lot of things coming, but there's going to be like a much better buyback system utilizing Hyperliquid at some point. And that also includes smart buyback, as in this sort of like building up of a buffer and then buying more when the price is lower and that type of stuff. Could we have a list of the 17 agents, description, funding needed, and estimate? I mean, that's coming, but it's coming. It's going to come so that everything is presented with the right context. Unfortunately, it's not. Everybody thinks they want like just like the raw details of everything, but that's not actually the case. What really is needed is like a proper full context introduction for each of these, because they're all like super amazing. So right now, actually, there's a total potential for 17 Genesis agents. But out of these 17 Genesis agents, first of all, 3 of them are executors, right? So there's actually 14 Genesis stars, which is kind of like, which are the really exciting ones, right? That are going to like grow the business. Out of these 14 stars, there are actually, it's like hard to keep track of this. Let me just count for a second so I don't say the wrong number. So, okay, yes. So there are 7 of these that right now have essentially like fully functional teams and like, like really driven founders that are like A players that were selected, right? Because these people were the right people to really spearhead this whole concept. Where every single Genesis star becomes a huge success, and we don't have any duds, right? Because we really want like the best first impression of what can be done with stars. Yeah, and it's like, I mean, it's actually pretty crazy. Just how much capacity and potential that's in place in just the current cohort, when they're still just like it's still just getting started, right? Like it's really just like it's like legal work, and it's like setting up the teams and this preparation for a lot of the technical work. But I mean, we've already only scratched the surface, right? And we've demonstrated we can launch 2 stars so far. We've still barely launched Keel, right? So like a lot of that is gonna, like all of these stars with the full teams, they're gonna probably all be up and running by the end of Q1, close to that. So I mean, once they're like totally ready, that's when all of the details will be revealed, right? Because there's actually a lot of stuff there. Like this is not like a bunch of copy paste cookie cutter stuff. This is like some of the best startups, basically, probably in the whole industry, in all of crypto. And most, I mean, exciting about them is that they have really, really solid founders and really solid core teams, which is really which is the crucial bit. Okay, let's go to some other questions. Okay, more buybacks means less liquidity. What is our long-term plan for the liquidity issues we keep having? Like actually, the problem is this like garbage valley concept. Like it's basically that there's this extreme information asymmetry that has to be dealt with through like much more consistent and clear communication and marketing and all of these things, like conveying the value of Sky, like the fact that it's now listed and so on. But there's just been so many constant, basically new products, new things being shipped, that it's still not been possible to really get this message across. But then now that, like, I mean, now everything is in place. Well, almost everything. So there's going to be a few more small pieces that are coming very soon. And then really, I think the big moment when a lot of the information asymmetry around the value of Sky, right, and the reason why traders should be trading it will start to surface to a much greater extent. Yeah, how is the interest rate determined for SGUSDS? Is there an IRM? Yes, indeed there is, but it's like off-chain basically. So it's like a system that it's like an off-chain system that calculates this and then makes modifications. And this means that there could also be an override by the core council in case there's some kind of dislocation. And it was run manually. Well, I think it still is run manually, and it's just at the last step before the IRM can be activated. Yeah. So how many stars could we expect in the next 6 to 12 months? I actually think we could like I think we will have 7 stars kind of announced and launched in the sense that they will operate. We'll have that by the end of Q1. And we will also have the executors launched and operating at a much greater level than they are now. They sort of are, they already exist to some extent as a concept in governance, but they will be much more kind of real and materialized and operational also at the end of Q1. And then we have Q2, Q3, and Q4 to basically get new teams, set everything up, vet them, prepare them, and then launch their products, and then eventually launch their tokens. So, I mean, there's like enough space for another, basically 5 Genesis stars, and then 2 Genesis generators. That's like that's kind of the full extent of like what like what Genesis agents we're proposing should be possible at all, right? Where Sky directly injects capital and Sky gets tokens in return. So basically any agents beyond this would then go through a different process where they're entirely privately funded. Which is on one hand is a little bit of a shame because yeah, again, there's no doubt that these projects are incredibly valuable. And the tokens are going to be super valuable. But it's just going to be even more valuable to have this kind of stability and predictability around what is Sky Core doing, right? So things can kind of start chill out a little bit in how complex Sky is. All right, so SRUSDS would be solicited only once the Genesis capital is too encumbered rather than upfront. No, so it will actually be done before. So SRUSDS will be launched as soon as it's technically possible. And then it's just a question of how much yield will be available for people depends on how heavily the Genesis capital is encumbered. But in any case, it simply makes sense to bootstrap SRUSDS a little bit because it's going to be an incredibly useful tool in the long run. All right, so is there going to be SRUSDS but for stars? The answer is yes, and in fact, there's going to be 2 kinds, right? So there's both going to be isolated senior risk. So that's going to be sort of like SRUSDS, but instead of being for the whole protocol, it's for just a single star. And then there's going to be what we call tokenized external junior risk capital, which is the much higher risk, higher reward token that people can buy that makes them sit pari passu with the star's own internal junior risk capital, and then is like essential for the star to really be able to scale. But there will actually be like different. You can sort of choose where you want to sit in the capital stack, which is really really essential and what makes Sky so powerful, because you then have all the pieces you need for very efficient capital formation, right? You can have all these different types of capital pools come together into a star, and then start using leverage and deploying capital and taking risk. And potentially this can become a fully permissionless process in a couple of years. So it can just like happen out of thin air, right? and eventually the goal is they should happen 100 times per day, right? That's like that's if we can have a full large scale capital formation event happening 100 times per day, producing an actual functional AI powered financial agent that's capitalized and able to take risk, then we have something that's gonna grow in a way beyond anything seen before. Yeah, okay, so the SPK agent tokens don't seem to necessarily have been great for Spark since price has largely been down only. Yeah, so I mean, the funny thing about this is that when SPK first launched, it didn't really have so much traction, right? So it actually went down to about the current market cap of around 400 million. Let me check. Make sure it didn't fall even lower than that. But last I checked, it was around 400 million. Yeah, right. So it's like 300 to 400 million. Then there was this huge pump that took it to like just it became more, it had got higher, it ended up being higher valued than Sky itself. And then it's been down only from there, but basically back to this like 300, 400 million size. And I think what we should hope for is that the market will learn from the mega pump that happened with Spark and not do the same thing to the other agents, because now it's going to be pretty obvious that it'll just go all the way back to like a more realistic valuation. In the end, I think like 300, 400 million is like hugely successful for Spark. So I actually think it's just like it's basically just like a market, I don't call it like a market dislocation, right? That it had that crazy pump. Um, and there's no doubt that it's essential to have the SPK token. So it makes a huge difference legally in terms of how much autonomy Spark can have, and opens up for all sorts of initiatives and transactions and capabilities that Spark is not taking full advantage of. So we're going to see a lot of like cool growth and a lot of cool initiatives coming out of Spark, because Spark has now actually matured so much and it's sort of getting so end to end that it's starting to kind of be able to venture into like a new, just I don't know what to call it, like the next level of operations that you would imagine stars would be doing, and that it's simply only possible with their own governance. So the tokens are just fundamentally necessary. And yeah, I mean, I think I try to tell people, don't trade the tokens or buy the tokens. Just I think that's like that's the right thing to do. Like the people who actually want to trade them, they should really know what they're doing. But if you don't really want to care about that, then you can simply farm them, and it's just like a great deal, right? You just get a bunch of tokens for free, and it doesn't matter if it dumps or pumps or whatever happens, because one thing is for sure, and that is that there is going to be real value, real profits, really solid team. All of these things is going to be the case. I mean, it's the case for Spark, and it's going to be the case for the other Genesis agents too. And of course the killer well, I don't know if there's a killer feature, but even if the team turns out to be completely terrible in one of these Genesis agents, um, then as a token holder, you're still protected by Sky, meaning it's not like the team can rug pull you, or they can just be totally negligent and useless and like what's it you call, I think it's called a slow rug. Like they can't even slow rug you, right? You can appeal to Sky governance and basically get them for breaching the atlas by being unprofessional or dishonest or just negligent, and they could be replaced by the team, right? Because all of the infrastructure for all of the stars is built so that ultimately the teams behind them, they don't have some kind of leverage or some kind of kill switch that means that you can't easily replace them. It's actually the exact opposite. Like they're all built very, very fundamentally to make it extremely easy to ultimately replace the teams if that's necessary. And because the teams know this stuff, I mean, they're all super competent, but they also know that the only way they get value out of this thing is if they deliver a lot of value, because they don't have some kind of privileged insider position that enables them to just rip off token holders. Yeah, I mean, so there's this comment about 72 million market cap for Spark, and so I do think that's the wrong. I don't think you should look at the market cap that way. I think it makes more sense to look at the FDV, or at least also look at the tokens that Sky has, because like the 72 million market cap, that's what's tradable right now, but there's a lot more that's like guaranteed to enter circulation. So I think it makes more sense to look at Spark as something that's valued at like 300 million, and then make a decision about whether it's a good token or not, based on that information. But one thing for sure is that it's probable, and there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff that the team is already doing to grow those profits. Well, all right. Any last questions, guys? Well, I mean, I'll just comment on this point about the Sky staking borrow. So, I mean, right now, because it's a fixed price, it's not the sticky oracle is not even dynamic, right? It's completely fixed at 4 cents. Then actually, there simply cannot be some additional risk from having some kind of freak pump in the Sky price. Later, we'll have the sticky oracle that dynamically adjusts. But basically, I mean, we need to be very careful when introducing that, right? So we should look at like historical changes in price from kind of basically from I guess from bottom to bottom in the cycle, right? And then we should basically let the sticky oracle move. It should basically, over the course of a bubble phase, it should readjust itself to the new bottom, right? It should be ready to sort of support leverage at the bottom after the big bubble is over. Maybe it can be slightly higher than the bottom, right? But I think that's kind of like, if you do it that way, then essentially you're removing the risk of any kind of cascade. And then meanwhile, what's really important about the stake borrow is, of course, it supports governance, it supports the Sky price and all that, but it also directly generates income. So it has this like very positive feature of kind of recycling income, in the sense that it sort of takes value from those who increase leverage in the system and transfers it to the system itself to stabilize it and provide higher staking rewards. All right. That was it for today. Yeah, I will not be joining the next call, but I don't know. Well, I guess you can check for updates to see if there's still going to be a call. Otherwise, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
For next week, just for everyone's agendas, we'll actually have the Grove team joining us.
Okay, now I'm getting FOMO. That sucks. Well, I'll watch the recording then. All right. Yeah. See you guys. Have a good day.